So I was on a call today and I got a very common objection that I hear. I thought it might be a good video idea. So that objection was that our suppliers can't absorb this 2% VMS fee. And most sales reps I find either back down or they start defending the fee. And I think both are mistakes. Today, I'm going to walk you through a calm, surgical way to handle that objection, protect your margin, and elevate the conversations to an executive level. This is especially relevant if you're selling VMS into manufacturing or logistics or any high volume contingent labor environments where supplier relationships feel sacred to those HR managers. So let me break it down step by step. Step one, acknowledging without agreeing. When they say suppliers cannot take on a 2% fee, your first response is not to debate it. You should say something along the lines of, that's a fair concern. Most organizations feel protective of their supplier margins, especially if they're negotiated aggressively. Then pause. Let them feel heard. Mm-mm. Step one is acknowledging without agreeing. Step one is acknowledging without agreeing. When the suppliers cannot take on a 2% fee, your first response is not to debate them. I find it's easier to just say something like, that's a fair concern. Most organizations feel protective of their supplier margins, especially if they've been negotiated pretty aggressively. Then I pause, I let them feel heard, and then you acknowledge the emotion and not agreeing with the premise. Mm-mm. And then I pause, let them feel heard. No. That's a fair concern. Most organizations feel protective of their supplier. Step one, acknowledge without agreeing. When they say suppliers cannot take on a 2% fee, your first response is not to debate it. I always find it easier to say something along the lines of, that's a fair concern. Most organizations feel protective of their supplier margins, especially if they've been negotiated aggressively. That at least makes them feel heard, and you're acknowledging the emotion, but not agreeing with the premise. Step two, reframe the word fee. Next, clarify the reality. Step two is reframing the word fee. I like to use something along the lines of in most enterprise programs, the VMS participation model is funded by suppliers in exchange for a structured demand, something like better vis. Step two is to reframe the word fee. I find that word to be a little icky, especially when you're talking to prospects and cold calling or whatever the situation is. I like to use something along the lines of this. I'll say in most enterprise programs, a VMS participation model is typically funded by suppliers in exchange for a structured demand, better visibility, consistent requisition flow, and it's not just simply a deduction from one side or the other. It's partition. Step two is reframing the word fee. I find that word to be a little icky and sensitive, especially when talking about supplier relationships that might be there for long term. I like to use something along the lines of this, right? In most enterprise programs, the VMS participation is funded by suppliers in exchange for something. Stuff like better visibility, more consistent requisition flow, and it's not just simply a deduction. It demonstrates, I think, the relationship between a VMS and a supplier, and that it's not just, hey, we're coming in and we're taking over and you're not going to be able to have these relationships. There is an aspect of the business that they're gaining, and it's a pretty large chunk. The introduction to other customers, ability to track the requisition flow and be able to project out for the rest of the year. So there's definitely some benefits on both sides. Step three is introduce the economic truth. Now we can elevate this conversation a little bit. I'll say something like, let me ask you something. If your suppliers truly don't have 2% of room, that usually means one of two things. They're already priced at an absolute floor margin, or pricing discipline across your entire program isn't centralized. Which one do you think that is? Then I pause. I let them kind of sit with that and determine, hey, do we even know why these margins are so low? You are no longer debating 2%. You're diagnosing kind of the economics of the relationship. Step 4 is reframe the risk. If suppliers operate at razor thin margins, then no governance or risk increases. Step 4 is reframing the risk. Now the conversation moves from protecting suppliers to protecting the entire organization. And that's where CFOs and procurement teams really live. Compliance shortcuts, higher turnover, quality issues, invoice errors, all of those things are tend to get left behind and are not fully discussed if there's not a program in place. Step 5, present a win-win model. I think calmly explaining what to. Step 5 is presenting a win-win model. Calmly explain what mature suppliers gain in a structured VMS environment. It's pretty obvious to the ones who are well educated in this space that there's more fair competition, there's equal visibility amongst all the suppliers, and there's predictable requisitions, faster feedback from your hiring managers, cleaner billing. In exchange, they participate at 2%. Most enterprise suppliers understand this model, and it's a standard in most VMS programs throughout the whole world. Strong suppliers value that predictability and transparency, and weak suppliers tend to resist it. Step 6 is bring it back to the math. If they are willing, Step 6 is bring it back to math. If they are running a $10 million annual temp labor spend, 2% equals 200,000. But centralized rate discipline and overtime control, now we're talking real business math, not emotion. Cancel. Step 6 is bring it back to math. If they're running a $10 million in annual spend labor program, then 2% equals to about 200,000 of those dollars. But centralized rate discipline, overtime control, and invoice accuracy typically recapture more than that in just a year. Now we're talking business math and not just emotion. Step 7 is offer a structure flexibility. Step 7 is offer structural flexibility. If the resistance is still there, you could say something like, if a flat 2% model feels heavy, we can structure tiered participation, volume-based models, or performance-based adjustments. The goal is not to squeeze suppliers, it's to make a professionalized ecosystem. That way you're... Uh, Step 7 is offer a structural... is Step 7 is offer structural flexibility. If the resistance is still there, you could say something along the lines of, hey, if a flat 2% model feels a little heavy, we can always structure tiered participation. We can make it volume-based or performance-based, but the goal isn't to squeeze your suppliers, it's to professionalize the process. That way you are flexible and you're not just dismounting prematurely. Now we can handle specific pushback. Something like our suppliers don't have room for 2%. Now we can handle now we can, Now let's handle specific pushback. So when a Now let's handle specific pushback. If a manager says, now let's handle specific pushback. If a leader says, now let's handle specific pushback. If a s- Now let's handle specific pushback. If someone in HR or one of your prospects says something like, our suppliers don't have room for 2%, this is where you elevate again. You could say something along the lines of, if suppliers truly can't support 2%, that tells us something important about the current structure. Then you can outline two scenarios. Scenario A, markups have been negotiated so low that suppliers survive on volume and shortcuts. Scenario B, the organization assumes that the suppliers will resist, but the market has never actually been tested. Then you can ask, hey, have you tested whether your suppliers would participate in a governed model if it meant structured volume and client insulation? Most have not. If you are in a VMS space so if you're in a VMS space and fee objections are slowing you down, the answer is not just lower your participation model. The answer So if you're in a VMS space and you're so if you are in the VMS space and fee objections are slowing down, the answer is not to just lower your participation model. The answer is to elevate the financial conversation a little bit sooner. Governance is not a cost center, right? It's control. Mm. If you are in the VMS space and fee objections are kind of slowing you down, the answer is not necessarily to lower that participation model. It's to elevate the financial conversation, dive a little bit deeper. If this was helpful, subscribe to the channel. Every week I break down some real conversations happening in the contingent labor and VMS market. So if you sell smarter, you can operate at an executive level. If this was helpful, subscribe to the channel. Every week I break down real conversations happening in the contingent labor and VMS space. So subscribe.